Before there were forests, before the world turned green, something else rose from the ground. They stood alone on empty plains, these silent columns, pale, rough, and towering higher than any plant had dared before. For centuries, their fossils confused even the most patient minds. Some said they were trees, others, coral reefs stranded far from the sea. But the truth, when it began to emerge, was stranger than either. They were mushrooms, giants from a forgotten chapter of life, older than any forest, older even than the first insects that would one day crawl among their roots. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still awake, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. In the stillness before dawn, picture the Earth as it once was, nearly 400 million years ago. No flowers, no grass, no birdsong, just rock, dust, and the shallow whisper of early seas lapping against lifeless shores. The air was thick with carbon dioxide. The sky glowed orange through the haze of volcanic clouds. And across this barren crust, enormous spires rose from the soil like the ribs of a forgotten cathedral. Prototaxites, the scientists would later call them, creatures neither plant nor animal, neither tree nor fungus as we understand them, yet something alive, breathing and aware in their own slow way. When their fossilized trunks were first unearthed in the mid-19th century, they shattered every assumption of what the early Earth should have looked like. How could something so large have existed before trees had evolved? The Scottish geologist Dawson believed them to be conifer-like plants, primitive ancestors of pines. Others thought they were seaweeds stranded on land. But the texture of their tissues, interwoven filaments, dense and spongy, refused to fit the pattern. Under the microscope, the structures resembled mycelium, the fibrous body of fungi. And in 2001, a quiet paper by the paleobotanist Francis Huber finally suggested what now seems impossible, that the tallest organisms on land, nearly 20 feet high, might have been giant mushrooms. Imagine walking among them, though in truth, there was little to walk upon. The ground was a thin layer of microbial mats, dark green and slippery, spread over bare stone. Tiny plants, no more than a few inches tall, clung to moisture in the cracks. Around them, the fungal towers rose like watchmen, drawing their strength from decay, from the chemical traces of life that had barely begun. They had no leaves to catch the sun, no roots to drink from streams. Yet somehow they grew, feeding on the invisible. Some say they were decomposers, feeding on algae and dead cells that drifted inland from the oceans. Others think they harvested the air itself, their inner threads breaking down minerals into nutrients. The fossils of Prototaxites have been found in Quebec, in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey and the Czech Republic, spread across the continents that were once joined into a single superland. Carbon isotope analyses of their tissues show that they did not photosynthesize. Their chemistry was that of heterotrophs, creatures that live off others. Yet what others were there to consume in a world still learning how to live? Perhaps they fed on the microbial crust itself, or on each other, recycling life before the first forest even began. To look at those cross-sections today, polished to stone, is to see rings and patterns like the grain of wood. But they are illusions. These rings do not mark seasons or growth spurts. They are slow memories of time itself, the rhythm of a planet adjusting to breath. In their layered filaments, one can almost hear the earth exhaling for the first time. Some paleobotanists argue that these giant mushrooms may have shaped the very chemistry of the atmosphere. By decomposing early plant matter and releasing carbon back into the air, they could have delayed the cooling of the planet, maintaining the warm, humid climate that allowed later forests to emerge. Others suspect they were part of a global carbon feedback. Their rise and fall synchronized with fluctuations in oxygen levels. In this view, they were not just passive growths, but agents in the planet's metabolism. Lungs of a world without lungs. Yet there is something unsettling in the thought that the earliest life to stand upright on land was not a tree, but a fungus. Trees symbolize light, aspiration, the upward pull of creation. Fungi symbolize decay, darkness, the work of returning matter to its origin. But what if the two were never enemies? What if the tree itself was born from fungus? The first forest built on the scaffolding of death. There are patterns in evolution that feel like memory, echoes of older designs. Today, deep beneath every forest, fungi still weave their threads through roots, trading sugar for minerals, connecting plant to plant in silent economies. Perhaps that relationship began here, among the giants of the Devonian plains. Perhaps the so-called Wood Wide Web is just a continuation of an empire that never really ended, only sank underground. No one can say how Prototaxites perceived its world, if perceive is even the right word. Some have imagined them as vast fungal chimneys, drawing air through their hollow cores. Others picture a porous, spongy skin that pulsed faintly as moisture rose. To live for centuries without eyes or sound, to feel only the slow chemistry of existence. What kind of awareness might that be? Was it thoughtless persistence, or a kind of subterranean patience we have long forgotten how to sense? Each fossil trunk is a frozen column of time, silent yet eloquent. The cracks that run through them could be mistaken for veins. They seem to tell of a world that tried something grand, then abandoned it. A failed experiment in verticality before leaves learned to stretch toward the sun. And when we find these remnants embedded in sandstone, we touch the memory of that failure. It is humbling to know that life had already reached for the sky long before we ever did. Scientists still argue about the details. The lack of clear reproductive structures in the fossils, the irregular isotopic ratios, the possibility that Prototaxites was not a fungus, but a lichen, a union of fungus and algae, two organisms pretending to be one. If that were true, then these giants might have been early prototypes of cooperation, symbiotic testaments to life's experiments with merging rather than competing. We look at these relics through glass in museums, their stone surfaces dulled by time, and we call them specimens. But perhaps they were monuments once, marking the boundary between chaos and order, between what was living and what was waiting to live. When they vanished, they left behind not bones or seeds, but silence. The kind of silence that lingers in the soil, in the spores, in the unseen breath of the earth. What remains certain is that they stood, unimaginably tall, impossibly alone, in a world with no trees, no animals to shade, no wind to rustle through branches, just windless air and the faint hiss of gas seeping from volcanic plains. And somewhere in that hush, the planet prepared for its next act. Perhaps that is why their fossils draw us so strongly, because they are reminders of an age when the line between life and stone was thin, when existence was not yet divided into green and gray, growth and decay. They are the ghosts of a possibility that the earth once tried, then forgot. And if the first forests were born from their fall, then maybe the story of life is not progress at all, but transformation. The same matter rising, falling, and rising again in new forms. But one question remains. If these mushroom giants were the first to build towers of life upon rock, what force decided they should disappear? Long before roots pierced the earth or leaves turned sunlight into sugar, the continents were almost naked. The world was half rock, half mist, its surfaces washed in a faint copper hue, its air thick with warmth and silence. To stand there, if one could, would be to hear almost nothing. Only the wind moving over stone, the pulse of distant volcanoes, and the slow exhalation of a planet still forming its skin. Those who study that forgotten epoch call it the Silurian and early Devonian, a time when land was not yet land as we know it, but a vast mineral desert. There were no forests, no soil rich with roots. Instead, life clung to the edges of things. Sheets of cyanobacteria crept over coastal plains, stitching together thin layers of green-black film. Microbial mats shimmered faintly in tidal zones, painting strange iridescent colors that might have looked like oil slicks under an amber sun. In this muted landscape, the very first fungi appeared, not yet tall like the Prototaxites to come, but secretive and soft. Weaving through cracks and lava tubes beneath the surface, they were invisible architects. Long before the first tree, the fungal threads were already experimenting with cooperation. Their filaments broke down minerals and made them shareable, dissolving silicates, freeing phosphorus, loosening rock into powder. And slowly, grain by grain, what we now call soil began to exist. In thin seams of dolomite and basaltic ash, paleontologists have found microscopic fossils, tiny, coiled filaments with internal septa, believed to be the remains of these first land fungi. Some were discovered in Canadian lava beds nearly 1 billion years old, others in the Doshantuo Formation of southern China. They are not much to look at, just hair-thin traces in stone. But under the microscope, they tell a story of connection, of something invisible preparing the ground for everything that would follow. It is strange to think that the earth once had to learn how to grow things. For millions of years, life thrived only in water, where nutrients flowed freely. On land, nothing could survive more than a few inches from the coast. The first organisms to cross that boundary faced a world without shelter, without moisture, and without any organic matter to feed on. Yet the fungi endured, feeding on volcanic glass, feasting on the dead algae swept in by tides. They were, perhaps, the first to understand that decay could be creation. Some modern scientists believe that the rise of these early fungi was not an accident, but a planetary necessity. Without them, the colonization of land by plants might have been impossible. Even today, no forest can thrive without fungal partners entangled among its roots. But back then, there were no roots at all, only fungal mats, living bridges that shared minerals and water through endless underground webs. They may have stretched for miles, invisible but alive, turning sterile continents into the faintest green. And yet, how could something so delicate survive in such harshness? The answer may lie in mutual dependence. Fossils from the Rhynie Chert of Scotland, dated to around 410 million years ago, show microscopic evidence of early mycorrhizal associations, plants and fungi already trading resources through intimate cellular networks. The symbiosis is ancient, perhaps older than the plants themselves. The mycelial filaments wrapped around primitive stems, forming what scientists call arbuscular mycorrhizae, allowing two forms of life to become one organism in function, if not in form. It's tempting to imagine these first partnerships not as accidents, but as rediscoveries, life remembering something it had known in the sea. For even marine environments teem with symbiotic unions: coral and algae, sponge and bacteria, lichens and cyanobacteria. The difference on land was exposure. To survive under open sky meant to invent trust. Perhaps the Earth's first forests began not with competition, but with intimacy. As these hidden networks spread, the planet's chemistry began to shift. The breakdown of rock accelerated the capture of carbon dioxide, cooling the atmosphere slightly. The continents breathed differently. Rain began to fall more often, condensed by new organic aerosols drifting from fungal spores. Even the colors of the sky changed. Some researchers speculate that before greenery, the air might have been tinted yellow or orange by high CO2 levels, scattering light differently across the horizon. Imagine sunsets that lasted hours, skies that never truly turned blue. Among the quiet stones, the fungal mats thickened, forming raised ridges where water pooled and microbes grew denser. These zones became nurseries of evolution. From them would arise the first mosses, liverworts, and primitive vascular plants, tiny, fragile, but persistent. Yet, beneath them, it was still the fungus doing the real work, digesting, recycling, and building the invisible foundation of ecosystems. There is something unsettling in the idea that the first engineers of life preferred darkness. They thrived where light could not reach, inside rock, under mud, within the pores of minerals. Their strength was not in visibility, but in endurance. Even now, deep under deserts and glaciers, fungi sleep in stone, their spores waiting for centuries. What kind of patience is that? What kind of memory does a cell hold when it has seen nearly 1 billion years pass? Some theories suggest that fungi may have evolved multiple times independently. Their genes do not trace neatly along a single lineage. Instead, their ancestry resembles the tangled web they weave underground, branches crossing, merging, dividing again. Perhaps fungus is not one kingdom but many, all converging toward the same purpose: to dissolve the rigid, to recycle the forgotten, to make death useful again. In recent years, isotopic studies of ancient soils have revealed faint chemical fingerprints of fungal metabolism, elevated ratios of carbon-13 and nitrogen-15, signs of slow decay long before plants became abundant. These traces are the planet's whisper of its own past, preserved in stone. If we listen carefully, they speak of a world that was learning to breathe, but not yet ready to flourish. Sometimes, when scientists reconstruct this early Earth in digital models, they simulate the atmosphere as heavy and moist, filled with drifting mists over black rock plains. In those simulations, raindrops fall on ground slick with microbial life, and small filaments rise briefly from the cracks before sinking back into shadow. It looks less like a world beginning and more like one remembering, an echo of something ancient returning for another try. If fungi were indeed the first to conquer land, then the story of life's expansion was not about light, but about darkness finding form. These beings did not reach upward for the sun. They expanded outward, inward, downward, multiplying through touch rather than vision. Theirs was a kingdom of sensation without shape, presence without face. And in that sense, they may have been the planet's first philosophers, exploring not through movement, but through absorption, through the endless act of dissolving what resists. There is a paradox here that lingers. We often imagine evolution as progress toward complexity, yet the fungi remind us that the foundation of life is not invention, but digestion. To make something new, one must first take something apart. The soil beneath every forest is proof of that principle, and maybe that's why even now we feel an odd unease in the presence of mushrooms. They seem both alive and ghostly, emerging overnight as if from memory. They connect us to something pre-human, a time when the world was raw and soft, when life itself was not yet divided into predator and prey, leaf and root, but was one endless conversation in the dark. What if the Earth's earliest forests were not born from competition, but from communion? Life whispering to itself beneath the surface, sharing secrets that even light could not hear. By the time the first true plants had begun to crawl above the mud, the fungal world had already built its empire. It was an age before leaves, before the sound of insects, before even the notion of shade. Across the shallow continents of the Devonian world, the air shimmered with warmth, and in that breathless stillness, strange towers rose from the soil. Prototaxites, vast columnar beings that defied reason. Some were as tall as a two-story building, their trunks nearly a meter thick, smooth and pale like ivory stone. For millions of years they were the tallest life forms on Earth, unmoving, unblinking, patient. What could have compelled such forms to exist? What need did they answer in a world so empty? Scientists once thought they must be trees. The fossils showed concentric rings, like the growth of wood. But when slices were placed under a microscope, the patterns dissolved into a labyrinth of filaments. No vessels, no cellulose, no leaves. Only mycelial strands layered into a living wall, denser than any plant tissue known. Francis Huber's meticulous studies at the Smithsonian confirmed the unthinkable. These giants were not trees, not algae, but fungi, monuments of decomposition standing alone on the horizon. To imagine them alive is to step into a dream between biology and architecture. The air was thick, the ground slick with moisture. The sky, veiled in volcanic haze, diffused sunlight into a perpetual amber twilight. Beneath that light, the fungal towers breathed. Moisture condensed along their sides and trickled down into the thin soil. Spores drifted from their tips like dust from forgotten statues. Perhaps they glowed faintly from within, nourished by unseen chemical reactions. If one could have walked among them, one might have heard only the slow crackle of decay, the soft sigh of gases escaping from the earth. Fossils found in Saudi Arabia and Quebec revealed that these beings dominated the land for nearly 40 million years. They stood over carpets of mosses and primitive vascular plants no higher than the ankle. In a landscape still learning how to host complexity, the Prototaxites reigned like guardians from another order of existence. But what sustained such enormity? Without chlorophyll, they could not harvest sunlight. Without roots, they could not draw water from depth. Carbon isotope analysis offered the first clue. Their tissues contained wildly variable signatures, some rich in carbon-13, others depleted, indicating that they fed on decaying organic matter from multiple sources. They were not passive, they were active recyclers, absorbing the chemistry of everything around them. This is perhaps the most haunting part. They thrived on death when almost nothing had yet died. A paradox of time itself. Some researchers propose that they formed symbioses with early photosynthetic organisms, lichens, cyanobacteria, algae, drawing nutrients from the living even as they decomposed the dead. Others think they lived parasitically, their underground threads penetrating microbial mats and sucking energy from whatever life they touched. Either way, they were mediators between birth and rot, a bridge between the organic and the mineral. And what if they were more than that? A few paleomycologists, studying the scale of their structure, suggest that Prototaxites might have served a global purpose. Their massive bodies, rising in vast numbers across humid lowlands, could have altered the atmosphere. Fungal metabolism releases carbon dioxide while consuming oxygen. On a planet already burdened with CO2, their presence may have amplified greenhouse effects, stabilizing the climate but delaying the cooling that forests would later require. In other words, the age of giant mushrooms may have been both the cradle and the constraint of life's expansion. There is a kind of poetry in that. The same organisms that made soil habitable may also have slowed the arrival of the trees that would one day replace them. Evolution is rarely gentle. Every creation carries its own erasure. What would it have been like to stand before one of these beings, to look upward through the haze and see its pale trunk vanish into mist? The air near its base might have smelled faintly of fermentation and wet stone. Small arthropods, newly evolved from marine ancestors, might have scuttled across its base, hiding from the sun under its shadow. Raindrops would cling to its surface and slide down in rivulets, darkening the flesh where they passed. To touch it would be to touch something neither plant nor animal, but something older, an ancestor of both decay and renewal. No one knows how long they lived. Some may have persisted for centuries, slowly thickening as their inner filaments multiplied. Others may have grown rapidly after storms, rising in years, not decades. And when they died, they collapsed in silence, leaving behind mats of rot that fed the next generation. Their life cycle was the planet's first rehearsal of the forest floor, the endless rhythm of growth, fall, and rebirth that defines ecosystems today. Even now, scientists cannot fully explain their structure. Were they solid pillars of tissue, or hollow spires with internal chambers for airflow? Some modern analogs, giant puffballs, honey mushrooms, offer hints, but none reach such scale. The idea that life could assemble itself into vertical towers without wood or bone feels almost alien. Yet the fossils are there, stubborn in their reality, defying simplicity. It is possible that Prototaxites were not a single species, but a form, a recurring pattern that appeared wherever conditions allowed. In humid regions with rich microbial mats, their spores may have flourished. In drier zones, they may have remained as sprawling mycelial plains, the same design repeating itself, as if life kept remembering a particular shape of ambition and trying it again. And then, gradually, they vanished, not in a cataclysm, but in a fading. As vascular plants evolved stems, roots, and leaves, they changed the carbon cycle entirely. Trees began to fix more carbon than the atmosphere could replenish. Oxygen rose, climates cooled, and the fungal towers found themselves outcompeted by the forests they had made possible. The age of fungi gave way to the age of wood. But disappearance does not always mean death. The descendants of Prototaxites may have retreated underground, relinquishing their monuments of flesh for networks of memory. Every tree root that touches a mycorrhizal thread may be a continuation of that ancient empire. The tower has fallen inward, becoming the forest floor, the soil, the unseen architecture beneath our feet. Some scientists wonder whether consciousness itself, our own neural networks, owe their pattern to this fungal inheritance. After all, both systems are networks of nodes and signals, constantly adjusting, adapting, remembering. Perhaps the first form of connectivity on land was not the brain, but the mycelium, the living circuitry that learned to share before anything could speak. In a quiet way, these ancient mushrooms were philosophers of the planet. They understood that to live was to merge, to trade, to dissolve. Their wisdom was in slowness, in accepting the inevitable return of all matter to dust. And perhaps that is why their story unsettles us, because deep down, it suggests that decay, not creation, is the source of order. Even now, deep in the fossil record, the great trunks of Prototaxites stand frozen in stone, like pillars of an unfinished temple. They mark a time when the Earth dreamed of vertical life, when fungus and air conspired to build something halfway between creature and cathedral. What if evolution's greatest experiments are not lost, only waiting to be reimagined? What if the forests we see today are merely the latest incarnation of those ancient towers? Life remembering its first attempt to reach upward from the dark. Beneath every step we take, beneath every root and stone, lies a kingdom that remembers the beginning. The fungal world did not vanish when the forests rose. It merely sank, retreating into the soil it had built. What appears now as silence is in truth an immense conversation, older than the trees that speak through it. And though we cannot hear it, this network continues to guide the living, sharing messages in molecules, whispers in chemistry, communion in decay. When the first forests appeared in the late Devonian, they rose upon a hidden scaffold. Their roots were not alone. They were wrapped in threads of fungal filaments, microscopic bridges that turned isolation into exchange. The Rhynie chert fossils, a petrified swamp preserved in quartz, reveal this secret with astonishing clarity. Within the translucent stone, scientists have found the earliest evidence of mycorrhizal networks, fungal hyphae embracing the roots of ancient plants in a tangle of intimacy. It was there, 400 million years ago, that cooperation became architecture. In those early days, the Earth was learning a new kind of balance. The air grew thinner, the skies brightened as oxygen increased. The fungal giants of the plains began to vanish, replaced by forests of lycophytes and ferns, small yet defiant. But below the surface, something more enduring was taking shape. An invisible civilization of filaments spreading through the ground, exchanging carbon for phosphorus, water for sugar. They formed the first global web, a living infrastructure connecting all that grew. Modern researchers call it the Wood Wide Web, but its essence is far older than wood. It is the continuation of the first pact, a promise between plant and fungus to share, to trust, to survive together in a world that changes without warning. Every forest today still keeps that promise. When a tree absorbs sunlight, a portion of its gift travels downward into the dark, into the waiting hands of the fungi. In return, the fungi deliver minerals gathered from stones, extending the reach of roots into distances they could never reach alone. We often imagine the forest as a silent place, but beneath the surface, it hums with communication. Through mycelial threads, chemical signals travel from tree to tree. Warnings of drought, messages of disease, even instructions for kinship. When one tree is attacked by insects, it releases volatile compounds that move through the network, alerting neighbors to strengthen their defenses. The forest behaves like a single organism, its intelligence distributed through fungal veins. It is easy to romanticize such things, to see in them a mirror of our own neural networks. But perhaps the resemblance is not coincidence. The mycelium's ability to process information, to recognize, adapt, and balance, follows the same mathematical principles as the human brain. It is a system of thresholds, probabilities, and feedback loops. Every thread knows only its neighbors, yet together they solve problems larger than themselves. If life on land evolved within such a matrix, then our very consciousness may be a continuation of this ancient pattern. Awareness growing out of connectivity. In the fossil record, the traces of this hidden kingdom are almost invisible. Fungal filaments rarely fossilize. They leave behind only impressions, thin mineral ghosts that shimmer under polarized light. But their influence is everywhere, in the structure of soils, the chemistry of sediments, the way carbon and oxygen cycle through time. It is the quiet persistence of the unseen that keeps the visible world alive. Some geobiologists suggest that the first true ecosystems, self-regulating, self-repairing, were not forests at all but fungal networks stretching across proto-continents. By linking plants, microbes, and minerals, fungi created the first stable biospheres. Without them, erosion would have washed nutrients into the sea, stripping land bare again. In this sense, the forest did not replace the age of fungi. It emerged from it, as fruit grows from the mycelium beneath. There is something deeply philosophical about that lineage. The visible rises from the invisible, the short-lived from the ancient. And we too, from the same soil. In recent years, molecular studies have confirmed just how ancient these alliances are. DNA sequences from modern mycorrhizae show an origin stretching back more than 500 million years, far older than the dinosaurs, older even than the first vertebrates to crawl onto land. These microscopic symbionts are among the oldest survivors on Earth, their design unchanged because it was already perfect. While empires have risen and vanished above, they have continued their work below, unseen and uninterrupted. When a forest burns, fungi are the first to return. When glaciers retreat, their spores are waiting, carried in dust, ready to rebuild. Some can survive radiation, drought, and time itself. They inhabit the ruins of Chernobyl, the cracks of Antarctic ice, the depths of the Mariana Trench. They are the planet's quiet immortals, feeding on whatever falls, light or shadow alike. It is strange, then, how little we notice them. We walk on their skin, breathe their spores, eat their fruit, yet rarely think of their presence. And when we do, it is usually in fear, rot, mold, infection. But perhaps that fear is only a mirror of our denial, the reminder that what sustains us will also one day reclaim us. For the fungus does not judge. It only continues. The Rhynie Chert specimens, those delicate windows into prehistory, tell us more than biology. They reveal philosophy written in stone, the idea that cooperation, not conquest, shaped the planet, that the unseen, not the dominant, holds the balance of life. It is humbling to know that our forests, these symbols of grandeur and power, stand only because of something that preferred to remain invisible. Imagine lying on the forest floor today, feeling the cool earth beneath your back, the faint pulse of roots and filaments just below. Each breath you take is shared with them, each heartbeat mirrored by chemical rhythms in the soil. It is easy to forget that this world, which seems so solid, is built upon decay. Yet that decay is order. It is memory. It is the mechanism by which time recycles itself into form. The mycorrhizal web is not merely a structure, but a memory of the age when the planet first learned to share. Its filaments still carry echoes of that lesson. Each atom of carbon in your breath, each molecule of oxygen in your blood, was once passed through their network, borrowed from stone, released into air, borrowed again. The Earth's respiration is fungal at its core. And so, when we speak of life evolving toward complexity, perhaps we are missing the truth. It is not complexity that matters, but continuity, the seamless circulation of matter and meaning through all things. The fungus does not grow upward to compete with trees. It grows through them, beneath them, within them, erasing the boundary between giver and taker. Maybe this is what the giant Prototaxites were trying to tell us all along. That to rise is only another form of reaching downward. That the true architecture of life is not the tower, but the web. Somewhere below the roots of the oldest forests, that message still hums. Quiet, patient, eternal. The air that those ancient mushrooms breathed would have felt heavy, almost liquid. Oxygen was scarce, carbon dioxide abundant. Every gust from the sea carried the scent of minerals and sulfur, a sharp metallic tang that clung to the skin. The planet's atmosphere was still learning its rhythm, still unsure how much to inhale, how much to exhale. And in that confusion of breath, life expanded, faltered, and tried again. When scientists today study the isotopic scars locked in Devonian rock, they find something strange. fluctuations in the balance of carbon and oxygen that seem too abrupt to belong to geological time. It is as if the planet itself were gasping, caught between inhale and exhale. These shifts correspond to the rise and fall of the great fungal towers. Around the time Prototaxites began to dominate the land, oxygen levels plummeted, only to surge again as forests took hold. It is a reminder that life and air are not separate things, but two halves of the same pulse. Before trees learned to bury carbon, the atmosphere was a restless experiment. Fungi, in their endless work of decay, released vast amounts of carbon dioxide. The microbial mats and early mosses absorbed some of it, but not enough to balance the cycle. And so the sky grew thicker. The haze that blanketed the continents was not pollution as we know it, but the natural breath of an uncoordinated biosphere. Exhalations without restraint. Some researchers call this the breath of carbon, the moment when the Earth first began to feel the consequences of its own metabolism. In those ages, sunlight would have felt different, filtered through layers of dust, vapor, and gas. It would have carried less blue, more red. Mornings bled into evenings without clear boundary. The world glowed softly, as though under a permanent sunset. The fungal towers, pale and porous, would have absorbed that light in diffuse tones, their surfaces sweating with moisture, exuding faint odors of fermentation. Each breath of wind carried spores by the millions, invisible seeds drifting through amber air. But something was happening beneath the surface. A slow rearrangement of power. The fungal web that had ruled the land for eons was beginning to encounter resistance. The first vascular plants had developed roots strong enough to break rock, stems firm enough to reach higher into the haze. They began to trap carbon in their bodies and bury it in sediments. With every fallen stem, oxygen rose a little higher. The air grew clearer. The sky began to turn blue for the first time. This transformation was not immediate. It took millions of years, yet in the language of the planet, it was sudden. A revolution of breath. Geochemical models suggest that by the late Devonian, oxygen levels had doubled from their earlier lows. The air that once pressed heavy against skin became thinner, more electric. Lightning flickered more easily. Fire was born. And with fire came death, rebirth, and the endless cycle that still defines life today. But before that balance stabilized, there was turmoil. Evidence from black shale deposits hints at widespread die-offs in shallow seas. Mass depletion of oxygen, triggered perhaps by the fungal decomposition of vast amounts of organic matter washed from land. The rivers carried decay into the ocean, where it spread like an infection, suffocating marine life. The first forests, small and tentative, collapsed into bogs. The carbon they released fed the fungi again, and the cycle repeated. It was a time of oscillation, of atmosphere and biology locked in feedback loops, each adjusting to the other's mistake. When we look at the chemical records today, the thin bands of carbon-12 and carbon-13 etched into rock, we can read the story of that suffocating world as if it were a pulse record. Each fluctuation marks an inhalation, a release, a pause. And in that rhythm, we find the fingerprints of life itself. Fungi decomposing what plants created, plants reclaiming what fungi released. Breath against breath, an ancient argument that has never ended. It is possible that the Earth's entire climate history has been shaped by this tension. Every rise and fall in oxygen corresponds to a rearrangement of life's hierarchy. When decay dominates, the air thickens and the world warms. When creation wins, the air clears and cools. We are the inheritors of that negotiation, breathing the compromise struck between the living and the dead. Some have called fungi the dark lungs of the planet. While trees exhale oxygen, fungi inhale it, feeding the circle of respiration. Their invisible exchange keeps the balance until one side grows too greedy. During the Devonian, that balance nearly broke. The massive fungal ecosystems, once stabilizing, became overwhelming. Their appetite for decay accelerated beyond what the young biosphere could sustain. It was as though the Earth itself began to suffocate on its own abundance. In the end, what saved the planet was competition, not of war, but of inheritance. The rise of trees, with their woody stems and complex roots, introduced a new principle: burial. Unlike soft fungal tissue, wood resisted decay. When forests fell, their trunks did not dissolve immediately. They sank into swamps, locking away carbon deep in the earth. Slowly, oxygen returned. The air cooled. The fungal empires withdrew into shadow. But even as they faded, their influence remained. The soil they made, the carbon cycles they shaped, the oxygen they denied and then restored, all of it laid the groundwork for what would come. Without their excess, there could have been no correction. Without their breath, no renewal. The age of giant mushrooms was the planet's first rehearsal of failure and recovery. It is strange to think that breath itself can be an artifact of time. Every inhalation we take today contains molecules that once passed through those fungal towers. Carbon atoms that drifted in Devonian haze, oxygen molecules born from the first forests. When we breathe, we resurrect them briefly, the ghosts of ancient air moving through modern lungs. There is an intimacy in that realization. The atmosphere is not separate from history. It is history, still circulating, still alive. To breathe is to remember. To exhale is to contribute another layer to that planetary memory. Perhaps the air itself carries the memory of every extinction, every rebirth. And perhaps the faint unease we feel when standing in a dense forest, inhaling the scent of damp earth, is the body recognizing something ancient. The chemistry of loss and renewal intertwined. In geological time, the Devonian shifting air would mark the beginning of balance, but also the end of innocence. The Earth had learned that life could alter climate, that metabolism could rewrite the sky. The age of the giant fungi had been the breath before articulation, a sigh of creation before the words of evolution formed. Now, the planet had spoken its first sentence. It said, "Everything that lives will one day shape the air that kills it." They disappeared without thunder, without smoke, without any apocalypse to mark their end. The great fungal towers that had watched over the empty plains for millions of years simply began to fade. One generation smaller than the last, one shadow shorter than before. By the late Devonian, the giants had vanished entirely. The land was changing, and the air itself no longer belonged to them. The forests had arrived. From the silence that followed, the earth seemed to breathe differently. Where once the wind carried the scent of wet decay, now it shimmered with the fragrance of greenery. Ferns, lycophytes, the first trees with true roots gripping the soil. Their branches stretched into the brightening sky, their leaves unfurling like sails into the sunlight. For the first time, shade existed. For the first time, the wind could rustle through foliage. The reign of the fungal towers, so patient and absolute, was over. The cause of their disappearance is still debated. Some claim it was competition, the plants that learned to channel water and minerals more efficiently, to grow faster and taller, to build bodies the fungi could not dissolve. Others believe it was chemistry. As trees spread and buried carbon, the atmosphere changed. Oxygen rose, and the humid twilight that had nurtured the fungal colossi gave way to cooler, drier skies. A few even whisper that it was collaboration, not defeat, that fungi chose to merge, to trade monument for network, to live invisibly through their new green allies. Whatever the truth, the fossil record captures their slow retreat like a memory fading from stone. The thick, columnar trunks of Prototaxites become rarer after 380 million years ago. In the layers above, we find instead the traces of forests, the root webs of Archaeopteryx, the woody stems of early conifers, the spores of towering ferns. The world had become vertical in a different way. If the age of mushrooms was the Earth's first attempt at grandeur, the age of trees was its perfection. But perfection, too, is a kind of forgetting. In the silence between fossils, we can still imagine the final days of the fungal giants. The air growing colder, the mist less frequent, the microbial mats drying and cracking under the sun. Their trunks, once moist and living, becoming brittle, their filaments withdrawing underground like nerves in retreat. Spores still released into the air, but fewer each year, carried by winds that no longer favored them. Eventually, the forests closed over their graves, their bodies turning to soil. Yet perhaps that was the point all along, to create the ground for others to stand upon, to dissolve so that something new could take form. In the logic of fungi, death is not an ending but a transaction, the moment when one life becomes the foundation for another. Their disappearance, then, was not extinction, but transference. They entered the roots of plants, the decay of logs, the breath of soil. Their towers may have fallen, but their empire never ended. Even today, under the forests that replaced them, we find echoes of those ancient architects. In the cool darkness beneath pines and birches, the soil hums with the same mycelial threads that once formed the flesh of Prototaxites. They connect trees across distances, passing information and nutrients, balancing ecosystems with invisible precision. The forests we admire are merely the visible portion of a structure that remains mostly hidden. A cathedral inverted, its vaults buried in the earth. The fall of the fungal giants also left chemical fingerprints that have never faded. In the carbon-rich strata of Devonian rock, we see the end of one metabolism and the birth of another. The atmospheric shift that accompanied their decline set the stage for the Carboniferous, a time of luxuriant growth, of forests so dense they would one day become coal. The oxygen levels soared to record heights, fueling giant insects and amphibians. But beneath that explosive life, the fungal world continued its quiet labor, decomposing, recycling, remembering. Some geologists describe this as the first ecological handover. The fungi built the soil, the trees took the sky, and together they created the modern biosphere. It is a story of succession, not conflict, of systems evolving toward cooperation rather than conquest. But cooperation has its price. The fungal giants, once the dominant life on land, became servants to the new kingdom of green. They surrendered visibility for endurance. There is a certain melancholy in that transition. The Prototaxites had stood alone, self-sufficient, monumental. They were the first vertical life, the first structures to break the horizon. Yet their descendants would live forever underground, anonymous, unacknowledged, essential. It is the fate of many civilizations. The builders vanish, but their foundations remain. When modern scientists study fungal fossils under electron microscopes, they find filaments still clinging to mineral grains, ghostly scaffolds etched in silica. Some show signs of decay caused by early bacteria, suggesting that even decomposition itself was being decomposed. The layers tell a recursive story, life eating life, feeding life, until no boundary remains. Perhaps that was the true lesson of the fungi. that identity is temporary, but participation is eternal. We like to imagine extinction as absence, but sometimes it is absorption. The fungal towers did not vanish into nothing. They became everything that came after. Their elements flowed into soil, plants, and air. The phosphorus they mined from rock now circulates through our veins. The carbon they exhaled still drifts through our lungs. We are breathing the remnants of their last sigh. It is tempting to see their fall as tragedy, but maybe it was a form of enlightenment. The moment when life realized that permanence was an illusion. To spread across time, one must dissolve into it. The forest learned that lesson perfectly. And yet, deep underground, there may still be remnants of their colossal kind. Some fossilized stumps discovered in remote Arctic outcrops show fungal structures larger than expected, their inner tissues mineralized yet distinct. Could they be late survivors, lingering in isolation after the world had moved on? Or are they simply misinterpreted, artifacts of preservation, illusions born of stone and wishful thinking? We may never know, but one thing feels certain. The earth does not forget. It recycles its dreams as faithfully as its matter. The rise of fungi, their fall, and their transformation into the silent architecture of roots. All of it is part of the same meditation, the same slow contemplation of existence. When we walk through a forest today, the soft earth yielding underfoot, we are treading on their remains. Each footstep presses against what was once a living tower, what once touched the sky. The soil remembers them even if we do not. And perhaps, in its own quiet way, it grieves, not for their loss, but for the beauty of their surrender. If the first trees rose from their ashes, then perhaps all progress is built upon disappearance. Every act of creation demands a silence beneath it. Every forest owes its roots to a grave. And somewhere, in the thin layers of Devonian stone, a fossilized column still stands, cracked, weathered, but unmistakable. A monument to an age when the world's tallest beings were not made of wood, but of patience. When the fossils of Prototaxites first emerged from the rock, no one could agree on what they were. The 19th century was an age of certainty and confusion all at once, a time when every new discovery seemed to rewrite the Earth's story. Yet each answer only birthed more doubt. The fossilized trunks looked like trees, complete with growth rings and woody textures. But they lay embedded in strata far older than any forest should exist in. To the geologists of the day, it was an offense to order. Life was supposed to progress neatly. Moss, fern, tree, animal, man. Yet here was something ancient, vast, and utterly out of place. In 1859, William Dawson, a Scottish-Canadian geologist, examined the first specimens from Quebec. He believed they must be the remains of primitive conifers, ancestors of pines that somehow flourished long before their time. He called them Prototaxites, the first yew, naming them after the genus Taxus. But others disagreed. The surface texture was wrong. The cell walls lacked lignin, the hardening molecule that defines wood. In 1872, the botanist Carruthers suggested they were a type of giant alga, perhaps related to seaweed that had adapted to life on land. The debate deepened as more fossils appeared, in Canada, in Saudi Arabia, in the Scottish Highlands. Under magnification, the puzzle grew stranger. Each trunk was composed of countless interlocking tubes, some wide, some fine, all woven together in a spiraling pattern. No one could tell what it meant. To some, it resembled vascular tissue, the channels that carry water through plants. To others, it looked exactly like fungal mycelium, the thread-like filaments that form mushrooms. Yet, how could something fungal grow so tall? Fungi had no roots, no leaves, no way to support themselves against gravity. The very idea was absurd, and so the mystery persisted for more than a century, each new paper contradicting the last. In 1930, a group of American paleobotanists proposed that Prototaxites was neither plant nor fungus, but a composite organism, a giant lichen, a fusion of fungus and photosynthetic algae living together in one body. The idea was beautiful. Cooperation as architecture. It fit the mood of the early ecological movement, which loved the notion that symbiosis could build worlds. But later, chemical analyses began to erode that vision. In the early 2000s, advances in isotope geochemistry finally gave scientists a new tool. Samples of Prototaxites from Canada and Saudi Arabia were examined for carbon isotope ratios, subtle differences in atomic weight that reveal how an organism obtained its food. The results were decisive. The isotopic values varied too widely to come from photosynthesis. Whatever Prototaxites was, it did not make its own food. It consumed it. That meant it was a heterotroph, an eater, not a grower. And that, in turn, meant fungus. Francis Huber, the quiet Smithsonian researcher who devoted decades to the problem, finally published his monumental paper in 2001, concluding that Prototaxites was indeed a fungus, perhaps the largest ever to exist. His argument was cautious, meticulously reasoned, yet still met with disbelief. To many paleobotanists, the idea of a fungus the height of a house was intolerable. It seemed to blur the line between the primitive and the sophisticated, between base decay and grand design. The debate has never truly ended. Even now, in journals and conferences, new hypotheses flicker like spores in the air. Some claim Prototaxites might still be a lichen, citing microtextures that suggest photosynthetic partners. Others propose that it represents an entirely lost branch of life, something between fungus and plant, neither one nor the other. Its internal organization, so complex yet so alien, refuses easy categorization. But perhaps the disagreement itself is the lesson. The more we study the past, the less it fits into the categories we invent for it. Nature does not obey our need for clarity. It grows in gradients, hybrids, and paradoxes. Prototaxites stands as a monument to that truth, a relic from an era when the boundaries between kingdoms were still fluid, when life was still deciding what it wanted to be. There is something almost poetic in how its meaning has shifted with time. In the Victorian Age, it symbolized confusion, an aberration that mocked science's confidence. In the 20th century, it became a curiosity, a footnote in paleobotany. And now, in the 21st, it has re-emerged as a symbol of connectivity, a reminder that the Earth's first ecosystems were built on cooperation and exchange. What was once a riddle of classification has become a meditation on unity. Every few years, a new fossil is found, and the debate breathes again. In 2015, a team in Saudi Arabia uncovered an unusually well-preserved specimen, its cellular filaments still visible in 3 dimensions. Some of the structures appeared to resemble air channels, suggesting a kind of primitive circulation system. Did these fungi breathe? In some way we no longer understand. Could they have contained internal currents, transporting gases or nutrients like blood in an animal? The thought is almost heretical, yet the evidence whispers something we cannot ignore. Science advances through correction, but truth advances through wonder. And sometimes, the two must part ways for a while. The story of Prototaxites is not merely about what it was, but about what it forced us to question. How we define life, how we imagine progress, how we interpret the silences of the fossil record. Each interpretation reveals more about us than about the fossil itself. It is no coincidence that the age of its discovery coincided with another age of upheaval. Darwin publishing On the Origin of Species, the world struggling to reconcile faith and evolution, certainty and uncertainty. Perhaps Prototaxites appeared precisely when we needed it, as a quiet challenge to our arrogance. It reminded us that the Earth has lived through countless experiments long before we began to measure them, and that our understanding of time is smaller than we think. When one looks at its fossils today, the concentric rings, the fibrous texture, the way the light catches on polished cross-sections, there is a strange beauty to their ambiguity. They seem to hover between plant and animal, between structure and spirit. They are the physical embodiment of a question. How does life decide what form to take? Even now, as we peer into the deep past with instruments more powerful than ever, Prototaxites remains elusive. Each answer dissolves into another hypothesis, like spores drifting beyond sight. Perhaps that is its final gift, to keep us in a state of wondering, to remind us that knowledge, like evolution, never stands still. And somewhere in a museum drawer, in a slab of stone polished to a dull sheen, a fossil waits. The label beneath it may say fungus, or lichen, or unknown. But the truth is simpler. It is a memory of transformation, of a world caught in the act of deciding what life could become. Maybe that is why we cannot agree on what it was. Because it was never one thing. It was transition itself. There is a whisper beneath the soil, a current so faint we can't hear it, but every forest lives by its pulse. Fungi still remember the age when they ruled alone. Though their towers have vanished, the mind that built them remains, stretched across continents, older than language, older than roots. Modern biologists call it mycorrhizal communication, nutrient exchange, biochemical signaling. But these are small words for something vast. It is a nervous system without neurons, a memory without a brain. If we could listen at the right frequency, we might hear the forest thinking, each tree a note, each thread a line of melody, the whole earth resonating in chemical conversation. Researchers from Canada, Japan, and Germany have measured these exchanges, pulses of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus moving between roots through fungal veins. One tree in shadow receives sugar from another bathed in light. A dying sapling sends its last reserves into the network, and nearby seedlings surge with growth. The system balances itself as though guided by something unseen. It is not intelligence in the human sense. It does not calculate or intend. Yet it behaves as if aware, as if every root, every spore, carries a quiet instinct for harmony. The same instinct that, hundreds of millions of years ago, wove fungal filaments through the roots of the first plants, allowing them to colonize the barren continents. That same conversation continues now, under our feet, uninterrupted for 500 million years. We like to imagine evolution as progress, but fungi have always been content with connection. They never built skeletons or skin. They never chased light or hunted prey. Instead, they mastered the art of merging, of dissolving the boundary between self and other. In that sense, they are the planet's first philosophers. Where animals divide, fungi unify. Where we seek control, they seek exchange. Their genius lies not in dominance, but in understanding that survival is distributed. Perhaps this is why so many ancient cultures revered mushrooms as sacred. In Siberia, the shaman spoke of Amanita muscaria, the red-capped toadstool, as a doorway between worlds. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs called the sacred fungi Teonanacatl, the flesh of the gods, believing they carried messages from the underworld to the living. Long before microscopes or genetics, humans sensed what the fossils later confirmed: that fungi exist between realms, translating decay into life, silence into continuation. Modern science, in its own cautious way, has begun to circle back to the same realization. When mycologists place sensors in soil and amplify the electrical signals along mycelial networks, they find patterns resembling syntax, bursts of voltage grouped in sequences like primitive language. The British biologist Andrew Adamatsky recorded these fungal spikes in 2021 and discovered that they clustered in groups of 20 to 50 signals, as if forming phrases. It may not be speech, but it is certainly coordination, information moving through living matter, adjusting behavior in real time. And if that is true, then every forest is alive in a way we are only beginning to imagine. Not merely as a collection of trees, but as a single distributed organism, one that senses, reacts, and remembers. The trees are its lungs, the fungi, its neurons. Together, they form a slow consciousness, measured not in seconds, but in centuries. It is easy to dismiss this as metaphor, but what if it isn't? What if Prototaxites, those ancient giants, were not primitive at all, but the first manifestation of a planetary intelligence, a neural architecture in flesh and spore, stretching across landscapes before animals even learned to think? What if the forests that replace them are simply the next stage of the same awareness, evolving from tower to network, from body to mind? We might laugh at the idea of fungal thought, but we forget how little we understand our own. Our brains, too, are networks of filaments, bathed in chemistry, communicating through pulses. The difference is scale, not principle. Perhaps consciousness is not a property of matter, but of connection. Wherever enough threads converge, awareness stirs, whether in neurons, roots, or mycelium. There's a quiet rebellion in that idea. It suggests that life is not hierarchical, but horizontal. That wisdom may not belong only to creatures with eyes and hearts. When we step into a forest and feel an inexplicable calm, perhaps it is not imagination. Perhaps we are entering a field of coherence, a web of resonance that includes us, receives us, reads our breath as data. The philosopher Merlin Sheldrake once wrote that the most complex behaviors on Earth occur underground. He meant it literally. Beneath a single step of forest floor lies kilometers of mycelium, each cell exchanging signals faster than we could track. When one region dries, others redistribute moisture. When nutrients are scarce, they reroute. When damage occurs, they regenerate pathways and patterns mathematically identical to brain repair. The forest, then, is not passive. It is alive with computation. And still, there is poetry in its method. Unlike machines, fungi do not store information in memory banks or electric codes. They remember through material change. Every interaction leaves a trace. Every exchange reshapes the structure of the network. Knowledge is not recorded, but embodied. When the soil feels different after rain, that difference is its memory. Perhaps that is why the world's oldest organisms are fungal. The Armillaria ostoyi colony in Oregon covers more than 2,000 acres and may be 8,000 years old. It has outlived empires, glaciations, extinctions, simply by existing as connection itself. No single part is immortal, yet the pattern never dies. In that sense, immortality was never about permanence, but persistence of relationship. The fungal mind survives by staying in conversation with the living. When a tree falls, it feeds the network. When it burns, the ash nourishes new threads. When the forest sleeps under snow, the fungi wait. Patient, timeless. dreaming the same dream they dreamed in the Devonian, of matter learning how to feel. If there is a consciousness of the earth, it might not look upward at the stars, but downward into the dark. It might think not in words, but in chemistry, in the slow logic of decay and renewal. And perhaps, when we feel awe before nature, that quiet, almost sacred stillness, it is the echo of that deeper awareness touching ours. In the end, we are not separate from it. Our lungs mirror the pattern of roots, our neurons the branching of hyphae. We are iterations of the same design. The intelligence we call human may simply be the fungus's latest experiment in self-awareness, a brief spark in its long, patient unfolding. Maybe that's why the thought of decay unsettles us. We sense deep down that to decompose is to rejoin something far older than death, to return to the network that never left, that still hums beneath our feet, remembering everything we have forgotten. If we could have breathed the air of that lost age, it would have felt thick, humid, almost sweet, like stepping into the lungs of another world. The Devonian atmosphere was unlike anything we know. Heavier, richer in carbon dioxide, hazed with volcanic gases and sea spray, its oxygen only beginning to rise after eons of chemical hesitation. Every breath carried the memory of a planet still becoming itself. And within that breath, the giant fungi lived, inhaling what we could never survive, exhaling the gases that would someday sustain us. Geochemists have tried to reconstruct that air from mineral clues, bubbles trapped in amber-like resin, isotopic traces in fossilized leaves, the oxidation state of iron in ancient soils. What they find defies the simple curve of progress. Oxygen did not simply increase from nothing to abundance. It flickered, wavered, stalled. There were intervals when the atmosphere nearly suffocated, when the oceans turned sour, when the light itself seemed dulled by haze. These moments correspond to the great shifts of carbon cycling, the silent dialogue between fungi and plants, decay and creation, each altering the sky in turn. Imagine standing on the shore of that ancient world. The sun would appear larger, its light tinted gold by suspended dust. The horizon might shimmer with a faint copper glow, the product of methane and volcanic sulfur mixing in the upper air. There would be no blue sky, no true dawn. The clouds would drift low, heavy with mineral vapor, and the first rays of morning would ignite them into crimson mist. Every inhalation would taste faintly of metal, and yet, life endured. The same gases that would poison us became the nutrients of another order. Fungal metabolisms thrived on carbon dioxide, breaking down stone and dead matter to feed the primitive plants that lined the shores. It was a partnership written in breath. One exhaled what the other needed. The planet itself was learning to breathe through its organisms. The atmosphere was not merely a backdrop to life, it was its product, sculpted molecule by molecule through the acts of respiration and decay. Even now, deep in the fossil record, we can read the traces of that respiration. Tiny shifts in isotopic ratios, minute differences in carbon-13 and carbon-12, mark the rhythm of an ancient metabolism. Geologists call these signatures fractionations, but the name hides their poetry. Each fractionation is a fossilized sigh, the imprint of an atmosphere exhaled by beings long gone. In layers of shale and limestone, these sighs accumulate into chords, into patterns, into songs. The earth hums with their memory. There is evidence that the air of the Devonian carried more moisture than today, a kind of global humidity that blurred the boundaries between land and cloud. The first forests helped create this. Their transpiration filled the atmosphere with vapor, weaving the first hydrological cycles. But long before the trees, the fungal towers may have done something similar. Their porous surfaces absorbed rain and released it slowly, regulating evaporation. In this way, the fungus may have been the planet's first attempt at weather control. Crude, unconscious, yet essential. Some paleoclimatologists think that this delicate balance collapsed more than once. When decomposition outpaced growth, too much carbon dioxide flooded the sky, warming the planet. When growth exceeded decay, oxygen spiked, cooling it again. The Devonian was a pendulum swinging between fire and frost. Each swing left its mark. A layer of black shale here, a gap in coral reefs there, like the lungs of the earth contracting and expanding through deep time. In this breathing world, the fungi stood as intermediaries between air and stone. They extracted minerals that could not dissolve on their own, feeding the first green life with the elements of rock. The chemical fingerprints of calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium found in ancient plant fossils bear the marks of fungal mediation. Even our bones, rich in the same minerals, are descended from that exchange. To hold a breath today is to hold, in miniature, the same process. An oscillation between mineral and vapor, the inheritance of ancient respiration. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to the scent of rain on dry earth. That sharp, sweet aroma scientists call petrichor. It is caused by actinobacteria and fungal spores released when soil meets water. The smell is billions of years old, the perfume of the planet remembering how to breathe. Every rainfall revives that ancient chemistry, that mingling of air and decay that once reshaped the atmosphere. In that scent lies the memory of the first collaboration between sky and soil. When the first trees rose and oxygen surged, the atmosphere transformed again. Lightning grew more frequent, fueled by the new conductivity of moist, ion-rich air. Fire became possible, an invention of the forests, but also of the fungi that prepared them. Because without decomposition there could be no carbon cycle. Without carbon, no combustion. Even destruction owes its existence to decay. And yet, within this new oxygen-rich sky, something subtle changed in life itself. The chemistry of breathing, perfected over billions of years, began to favor energy and speed. Animals that had once relied on slow diffusion developed lungs and gills to harness the surplus oxygen. Movement became possible, flight inevitable. It is as if the world inhaled deeply and exhaled motion. The fungi, by contrast, remained still. They had shaped the air only to become invisible within it. Their era as architects had ended, but their influence endured in every breath taken by their descendants. The trees, the animals, and us. When we inhale, the oxygen that floods our blood is not merely chemical, it is historical. It carries within it the record of ages, of atmospheres built and rebuilt, of fungi rising and falling and rising again beneath new forms. To the ancient earth, air was not empty. It was substance, weight, flavor, temperature, memory. The winds that circled the Devonian continents carried spores, dust, volcanic ash, and the first pollen. They were alive with potential. Perhaps the atmosphere itself was conscious in some way, a vast field of exchange connecting all things. Modern physics calls this connectivity diffusion, but the word feels inadequate. The ancients would have called it spirit. There is a strange comfort in imagining that the very air around us still remembers those first breaths. Each molecule of oxygen we inhale has likely existed since long before humans, recycled countless times through lungs, leaves, and fungal membranes. It has passed through the veins of dinosaurs, the gills of trilobites, the pores of Prototaxites. It has crossed the entire timeline of life, unchanged in its essence. We live inside a memory, a thin layer of gases that once flowed through beings we can barely imagine. The atmosphere is our oldest inheritance, yet we forget it constantly, mistaking it for emptiness. But if we were quiet enough, if we listened as fungi do, we might hear it whispering still, that everything which breathes is part of the same story, the same endless exchange of life and loss. Between the fossils there are silences, layers of rock where no record survives, gaps so complete that even the most careful hands cannot bridge them. Paleontologists call these absences unconformities, but the word feels too clean for what they are. They are erasures, forgotten intervals where the world spoke in materials that could not endure. Water, wind, sound, scent, softness. The deep time of the Devonian is full of such absences. We see the remains of trunks, spores, minerals, but not the textures of their living touch, not the humidity of a dawn misted with fungal breath, not the faint luminescence of decay in the night. What we study is only the echo, never the voice. There is something profoundly human in that blindness. We inherit the surface of things and mistake it for the whole. A polished fossil tells us only about endurance, not about the fragility that made endurance possible. And yet, perhaps fragility is what shaped everything that came after. The earth remembers not through what it preserved, but through what it lost. Scientists know this in theory, though they rarely say it aloud. They measure isotopes, analyze sediments, calculate rates of deposition. But between those measurements lies the unmeasured, the songs of insects that had just evolved, the crackle of ancient lightning, the soft collapse of a decaying giant mushroom onto the moss. These vanished sensations were the true texture of that world. And without them, our reconstructions are only skeletons. When researchers study the Rhynie chert, that miraculous window of petrified swamp where every detail of early life is frozen in quartz, they find filaments so fine that they shimmer under polarized light like strands of hair. Each one once pulsed with liquid. Each one was part of a rhythm too subtle to fossilize, the cycle of water, nutrient, breath. Between those filaments, empty space. And in that space, imagination begins. What if silence is not the absence of information, but another kind of evidence? The missing layers of history may be the most truthful of all, because they remind us how partial our knowing must remain. For every fossil we uncover, there are thousands that dissolved. For every organism remembered in stone, countless others turned to air. The geological record is a language written mostly in pauses. The age of fungi is especially full of these interruptions. The mycelial world leaves almost nothing behind. Its tissues collapse when exposed. Its chemistry erases itself as it feeds. Even when conditions are perfect for preservation, what survives are shadows, mineral ghosts of once living threads. To reconstruct a fungus from these fragments is like trying to reconstruct a symphony from the memory of its echo. And yet, maybe that incompleteness is what draws us in. We are not simply collectors of fossils. We are listeners, leaning toward a silence that seems to speak. The more gaps we find, the more we imagine what filled them. In that act of imagining, the past lives again, not as certainty but as dream. Some scientists have tried to recover even the invisible. In 2019, a group in China extracted chemical residues from a 635-million-year-old cave formation, traces of what may be the oldest fungi on Earth. They found lipids, molecular fossils, still bearing the fingerprint of fungal metabolism. It was as if the air itself had kept a secret. But these discoveries are rare. Most of the Earth's history remains unrecorded, hidden in forms that cannot fossilize. The warmth of decay, the shimmer of spores in twilight, the chemical breath that once filled the atmosphere. To study prehistory, then, is to listen to absence, to treat silence as data, to read the gaps as carefully as the layers. Perhaps that is why so many who work in deep time speak with reverence. They know that their evidence is the residue of something vast that refused to be captured. Every stone is a confession of what could not be kept. In that sense, paleontology is not unlike memory itself. We remember selectively, preserving fragments, losing the rest. What survives becomes myth. What vanishes becomes meaning. The Earth, too, remembers in this way, not as a machine storing information, but as a storyteller choosing what to keep. The fossil record is its poetry of omission. Even the most advanced technologies cannot restore what time has erased. CT scans can reveal hidden chambers in fossils. Synchrotrons can detect single atoms of iron. But no instrument can recover the sound of rain falling on a Devonian forest or the smell of the soil after a storm. Those sensations belong to a category beyond retrieval. They are the metaphysics of life, the ephemeral. Yet sometimes when scientists crack open a slab of chert or shale and find a perfect imprint, a leaf vein, a fungal filament, a raindrop mark, there is a moment of stillness. The air around them feels older. The silence deepens. It is as if the missing world leans close for an instant, allowing itself to be felt. The gap narrows. The fossil breathes, and then the moment passes, and the rock returns to stone. But the feeling lingers, that what is gone is not entirely gone, only transformed beyond our reach. The Devonian air, the fungal towers, the scent of wet decay, all of it may still circulate in forms we no longer recognize. Matter does not vanish. It translates itself. The silences between fossils, then, are not voids but thresholds. Through them, we glimpse the continuity that connects everything. The same carbon moving from fungus to tree, from tree to coal, from coal to smoke, from smoke to breath. The missing is not an absence, but a movement too slow to see. It is tempting to think of extinction as final, but even extinction is porous. The dead feed the living, the vanished give shape to the visible. What cannot be fossilized is often what endures most. The invisible relationships, the unrecorded exchanges, the whispers that move through time unbroken. Maybe that is the true legacy of the fungal world. To teach us that preservation is not the same as memory. The stone remembers form, the soil remembers function, and the air remembers feeling. Between them lies the history we cannot write, only sense. The silences of the past are not empty at all. They are breathing still. When the first forests finally rose, the earth must have looked newly awake. The horizon darkened with green, and rivers began to wander through shadow for the first time. What had once been plains of fungal spires became cathedrals of trunks and branches, their leaves trembling like the planet's first murmurs of language. The air, rich with oxygen, turned crisp. Rain fell more often, filtered by canopies. The light that once glowed amber through haze now scattered into softer blues. It was the dawn of shade, the beginning of stillness beneath living ceilings. Archaeopteryx was the name scientists would later give to the first true tree. Part fern, part conifer, part memory of what came before. It appeared near the end of the Devonian, about 375 million years ago. Its wood sturdy and vascular, its roots deep and articulate. Where the fungi had once stood alone, these trees gathered in communities, weaving light and water into something new. Permanence. For the first time, the land could hold time within it. Each ring, each root, a record of a year survived. The world of impermanence, the era of soft bodies and slow decay, began to solidify. But even this triumph of the green world was not simple victory. Beneath the roots of Archaeopteryx and its kin, the ancient fungal network endured, smaller now, yet infinitely more complex. It no longer rose toward the sun. It threaded the soil like thought, invisible and continuous. It was as though the giants had folded themselves inward, transforming from towers into tendrils. In that reversal lay an unspoken wisdom, that to survive is not always to stand tallest, but to go deepest. The partnership between tree and fungus deepened until the two could no longer be separated. Their chemical conversations became so intimate that neither could thrive without the other. In fossils of early tree roots, one can still see the coiling embrace of fungal hyphae around cells, the first proof of cooperation written in tissue. Mycorrhizal fungi extended the reach of roots, absorbing minerals from far beyond their range. In return, the trees sent down sugars, sunlight translated into food for the dark. The exchange created the first stable forests, ecosystems capable of self-regulation. The planet had found balance again, but balance built on dependence. From space, if one could have seen it, the transformation would have been profound. Where once continents shimmered red and brown with bare rock, they now wore continents of green. Clouds gathered over these forests, feeding rain back into the cycle that sustained them. Oxygen levels climbed again, and with it, the potential for new kinds of life. Insects with tracheal lungs, amphibians crawling from the shallows, the first vertebrates tasting air. The age of fungi had prepared the stage. The age of forests began the performance. And yet, the ghosts of the fungal towers were never entirely gone. Every forest floor held their memory, in the way fallen leaves decomposed into humus, in the way the air smelled after rain, in the way death always followed life so seamlessly. The very concept of a forest floor is an inheritance from them, an echo of the ancient mats that once fed on bare stone. When trees shed their leaves, when their branches fell and rotted, it was the fungi that received them, breaking them down, returning them to the soil. The circle was complete. The fungi had become the forest's bloodstream. Sometimes, when paleontologists uncover petrified roots, they find them wrapped in mineralized fungal filaments so fine they look like hair. The structures are precise, intentional, not parasites but partners. It is as though the earth itself designed a system for remembering cooperation, even as species rose and vanished. Through each extinction, through each renewal, the pattern remained the same: growth, death, exchange. But the rise of forests came with shadows too. Their immense roots stabilized the continents, but also altered rivers, changing erosion, shifting climates. As trees drew down carbon dioxide and locked it in their trunks, the atmosphere cooled. Glaciers crept across the southern continents. A mass extinction followed, the late Devonian crisis, when nearly 70% of marine life vanished. The forests had changed the air too quickly. Life had remade its own climate and paid the price. It is tempting to see this as tragedy, but perhaps it was simply another form of adjustment. The earth learns balance only through imbalance. The fungal towers had once overheated the sky with their exhalations. The forests, in turn, had chilled it. Each mistake gave rise to the next experiment. The biosphere's intelligence is not in foresight, but in response, in that slow dialogue between green and gray, decay and growth. Something deeper took root. An understanding written not in words, but in chemistry. The forest could not live without decomposition. Their strength depended on their own undoing. Every fallen branch nourished the network that nourished them. Each death reinforced the living. It was a theology of recycling, practiced in silence. Even today, Walking through an old forest, one can feel the echo of that balance. The air is thicker, more charged, as though alive with stored memory. Each step sinks softly, cushioned by centuries of decay. The smell of earth is the smell of continuity. Molecules that have passed through countless forms, from fungus to tree to leaf to soil again. The forest's beauty lies in that patience, the quiet willingness to become what comes after. The fossils tell us that Archaeopteryx forests endured for nearly 20 million years before giving way to newer lineages. The seed-bearing trees of the Carboniferous. Their fall, too, was slow, as all falls are in deep time. But the fungi remained, adapting endlessly to new partners, new chemistries, new rhythms of air and water. If the trees were the planet's bones, the fungi were its blood. Together, they invented the modern world. Perhaps this is why the memory of forests feels so familiar to us. Our lungs branch like roots. Our neurons echo their networks. We carry their architecture within us because we are built from their inheritance. Atoms once exchanged in their breath. Elements once carried through their cycles. The same oxygen that fills our chest is the same that once filled theirs, distilled from ancient green and older gray. The forest, in this sense, is not a place but a process, a living equation that has been running for 400 million years. Its inputs are light and loss, its outcome, renewal. Every organism since has lived inside that equation, borrowing from its logic, repeating its patterns. The rise of Archaeopteryx was not just the birth of trees, but the planet's discovery of rhythm. In the silence between root and leaf, the earth learned how to breathe steadily. And though the giants of fungus had fallen, they continued to exhale through other mouths. The forests that replaced them were not successors, but extensions, different verses of the same song. If one could stand in a Devonian grove at dusk, beneath the fern-like branches of Archaeopteryx, one might feel the same vibration that hums through modern woods, the sense of an ancient pulse just below hearing. It is the heartbeat of the fungal ancestors, still beating within the soil, reminding all who walk above that life is not built on conquest, but on communion. Time has a way of folding its memories into the smallest places. When scientists peer into amber or scrape at the thin walls of ancient permafrost, they sometimes find the impossible. Spores still intact, enzymes that still function, DNA that still whispers fragments of a forgotten genome. The fungal world, it seems, has never stopped remembering itself. Even after 400 million years, its chemistry hums with ancestral patterns, relics of an age when the world was damp and unformed and the air smelled of stone. Modern mycology, though clothed in microscopes and code, is less a study of organisms than of continuities. The threads of mycelium in a clump of moss are not separate from those that once wove through the flesh of Prototaxites. They are direct descendants, translated through time. When researchers extract ancient proteins from amber or frozen peat, they often find sequences unchanged since the Devonian. Enzymes that dissolve lignin, break down cellulose, and trade nutrients with roots. The same tools that carved soil out of rock now digest the walls of our cities, our books, our own remains. Everywhere the microscope turns, the ancient logic repeats itself. In ocean sediments, deep below the floor, entire ecosystems of fungi thrive in darkness, metabolizing slow minerals in near silence. In Arctic tundra, spores awaken after 30,000 years of sleep, their genetic machinery restarting as if no time had passed. And within our own bodies, fungal cells mingle with our microbiome, invisible passengers whose chemistry mirrors that of the forest floor. We carry the echo of that first alliance within us, A faint mycelial fingerprint on every breath. Somewhere between biology and philosophy, a strange truth emerges. The history of fungi is not a story of evolution in the usual sense. It is a story of persistence. They change form, but not intention. Their purpose has always been the same: to connect, to recycle, to translate death into continuity. And that intention persists in every cell, every spore, every human heartbeat that still depends on oxygen once given to the air by their ancient partners. When geneticists map fungal genomes, they find clues not only to ancestry, but to possibility. The genes that allow certain species to form symbiotic webs with plants appear remarkably similar to genes involved in neural communication in animals. Both rely on electrical gradients, molecular messengers, and thresholds of activation. The same logic of connection that once built soil now builds thought. It is as if the planet rehearsed communication through fungus before attempting it through flesh. Modern forests remain experiments in that same idea. The network beneath their roots carries more than nutrients. It carries information, preference, even care. Young trees receive carbon from elders. Species separated by centuries of evolution share the same underground messenger. Some researchers have documented what appears to be a kind of empathy encoded in chemistry: the transfer of food to weaker or shaded individuals. In laboratory studies, fungal threads reroute flows when damage occurs, prioritizing survival of the whole network over the success of the individual. The pattern is eerily familiar. We used to believe intelligence required a brain. That thought needed an organ to house it. But perhaps thought is a verb, not a structure, the act of connection itself. If so, then fungi were thinking long before minds existed, weaving a distributed awareness through the crust of the earth. When we analyze their behavior in petri dishes, the way they navigate mazes or solve nutrient puzzles, they display a problem-solving elegance no less profound than instinct. The line between chemistry and cognition begins to blur, and maybe that is the hidden inheritance we've drawn from them. Not just oxygen and soil, but a blueprint for awareness. Our nervous systems, with their branching dendrites and pulsating signals, follow the same architecture that once traced through the Devonian mud. It is not metaphor, it is continuity. We are expressions of an ancient pattern. The world thinking itself through filaments, then through neurons, then through language. Modern mycology confirms this connection in ways that feel both scientific and sacred. Some fungi form symbioses not only with plants but with algae, bacteria, even animals. The lichen, that quiet crust on stone, is a living treaty between kingdoms. Fungus and photosynthesizer are bound so intimately that neither can be separated without death. Each lichen is a microcosm of Earth's philosophy, coexistence over conquest. And their chemical resilience, their ability to survive radiation and vacuum, has led astrobiologists to speculate that fungal spores might endure in space, drifting like seeds between worlds. The idea seems fantastical, yet mathematically it is plausible. Perhaps the network that began here has always been larger than this planet. There is also the matter of our own relationship with them, the ways we have mirrored their role in culture. Humans ferment, we decompose, we recycle memory into meaning. Bread, beer, antibiotics, language, each is a fungal act in human form. Our civilizations grow, collapse, and regrow from what they've digested, just as soil does. In that sense, the fungal genome may be the oldest library, teaching not through permanence, but through repetition. And still, they keep teaching. When biologists study the communication of mycelial webs, They find not randomness, but rhythm, a series of electrical oscillations that repeat every few minutes, as if the organism breathes. Each oscillation corresponds to a pulse of nutrients, a redistribution of resources, a decision made by the collective. It is a slow intelligence, operating in the scale of seasons rather than seconds. But it is intelligence nonetheless. Some researchers believe the mycelial network may even store memory physically, through changes in the conductivity of its threads, an organic analog to our neural synapses. If that is true, then every forest is a mind, each one remembering floods, fires, droughts, migrations. The soil itself might be conscious of its history, reshaping growth according to what it has endured. When new saplings sprout, they inherit not only genetics, but instruction, a chemical legacy of adaptation. The world learns through decay, and perhaps that learning extends to us. The substances we call psychedelics, extracted from certain fungi, open neural circuits in our brains that mirror the branching networks from which they came. The visions they induce, of unity, of dissolution, of the boundaries between self and world falling away, may not be hallucinations at all, but glimpses of an older mode of perception. For a few hours, the mind returns to fungal logic, thinking in connections rather than separations. If the great mushrooms of prehistory were the planet's first monuments, then their descendants are its invisible philosophers, reminding us that knowledge does not ascend, it circulates. To understand life is to understand relationship, and no organism embodies that better than the one that thrives on relationship itself. We tend to measure progress by visibility, by what stands tall, what commands light, but fungi measure it differently. For them, greatness is measured by reach, by the subtlety of influence, by how many others can flourish through you. In that sense, they have never stopped ruling the world. They have simply learned how to do it quietly. Somewhere, in the soil beneath an old forest, a spore germinates. It stretches outward, not upward. It touches another, then another, until the entire ground hums with continuity. It is the same gesture made 400 million years ago when Prototaxites first lifted its pale body toward a red sky. The gesture of connection, the will to join. And perhaps that is what consciousness has always been. The Earth's slow realization that to exist is to reach. Long before there were stories, before sound or language, there was pattern, repetition and return, the quiet geometry of growth. The age of giant mushrooms was not merely a chapter in the history of life. It was the world's first sentence, written in the syntax of connection. Everything that followed, the forests, the oceans, the animals, even us, grew out of that initial thought. A thought that said, nothing exists alone. When the last of the fungal towers collapsed, they did not disappear. They descended. Their bodies broke apart into soil. Their spores became invisible constellations scattered by wind. The age of their grandeur was over, but their spirit diffused everywhere. In roots, in breath, in memory. To this day, their pattern remains. Every forest that rises carries within it their architecture. Every breath we take contains molecules they once exhaled. We are surrounded by their afterlife, living inside their continuation. The fossils tell us what endured in shape, but not in meaning. Perhaps Prototaxites was never meant to last as form, only as principle. It taught the earth that complexity could emerge from union, that height was not only vertical, but relational. Those giant columns were not towers of ambition, but spires of communication, a visible expression of what would later vanish underground. The planet learned its lesson, and the giants stepped aside. Even now, beneath every meadow and city, the mycelial mind hums, a slow current of intelligence threading between particles of rock. It digests our ruins, softens our walls, reclaims our monuments grain by grain. Our skyscrapers, so proud in their imitation of trees, will one day return to its patience. In time, the fungus will inherit us, as it has inherited everything. And perhaps, in doing so, it will not mourn but integrate. Somewhere deep beneath the forests of the Pacific Northwest, the largest known organism on Earth, a colony of Armillaria ostoyi, spreads across 2,000 acres of soil. It is neither plant nor animal, neither singular nor multiple. Its cells pulse with an ancient rhythm identical to the one that once beat inside the bodies of Prototaxites. To touch a single thread of it would be to touch millions of years of memory. The same code that once built the world's first giants still flows through it, quietly, unbroken. Human history is barely a flicker compared to this continuity. We measure time by invention, yet fungi measure it by absorption. They do not invent, they remember. They turn the forgotten into nourishment, the fallen into foundation. In that way, they are the planet's truest historians, not preserving what was, but ensuring it remains useful. Perhaps that is what wisdom has always been, the ability to transform loss into structure. Every civilization that has ever existed depends on their chemistry. The bread we eat, the wine we drink, the antibiotics that save our lives. Each is a descendant of the same metabolism that fed on stone and sunlight before forests were born. The fermentation that softens wheat or grape is the echo of that first digestion, the translation of death into renewal. We call it progress, but the fungi would call it memory. And though we study them with microscopes and genome maps, we rarely see the larger truth, that they are not simply organisms, but a language the planet uses to speak to itself. Through them, the dead communicate with the living, the soil with the sky, the past with the present. Every forest floor is a conversation in progress, whispered in the slow vocabulary of molecules. If we were still enough, perhaps we could hear it. The murmuring of carbon and oxygen passing between roots, the pulse of nitrogen through the veins of the ground, the faint electrical rhythm of a thought older than time. There is a certain humility in realizing that intelligence did not begin with us. The Earth has been thinking for hundreds of millions of years. Only its medium has changed, first through fungal threads, then through neural ones. What we call imagination might just be the mycelial inheritance within us, the lingering capacity to connect what seems separate, to sense the invisible relations that hold everything together. In that sense, the age of giant mushrooms never truly ended. It only retreated into the subconscious of the planet, into the dark where creation first learned to dream. Every idea, every symphony, every new form of life is an echo of that original dream, the dream of linking. Even now, scientists find networks of fungi in the deepest oceans, in Antarctic ice, in radioactive ruins where nothing else can live. They thrive on what the world discards. They continue the conversation when all other voices fall silent. Perhaps that is what the universe itself is doing, thinking through connection, composing itself through exchange. Stars, like fungi, recycle matter endlessly, collapsing and reforming, seeding new worlds with the dust of the old. The mycelium beneath our feet and the filaments of galaxies above our heads follow the same logic, branching, merging, dissolving, returning. Life and cosmos are variations of one pattern. The difference is only scale. If the ancient fungi taught the earth one lesson, it was patience. Their way of existing, slow, diffused, without boundary, reveals a truth that every civilization forgets, that endurance belongs not to the tallest, but to the most connected. Everything solitary perishes. Everything entangled survives. We, who live so fast and separate, might remember that. When we walk in the woods and feel a sudden calm, it may not be nostalgia, but recognition. An ancient alignment of our nervous system with the rhythm of the ground. The scent of wet soil, the softness underfoot, the hush between trees. All of it is the world reminding us of what we are made from. Fungal breath, ancient air, recycled thought. And if consciousness is indeed the universe becoming aware of itself, then perhaps fungi were the first moment of that awakening, the first network to feel. Their towers rose like neurons forming a thought, then dissolved when the thought was complete. What remains is the awareness they initiated, now dispersed through every living thing. We are each a continuation of their question. How does matter remember? No answer has ever been final. The fossils do not conclude the story, they only pause it. The age of giant mushrooms was the beginning of the Earth's meditation, a meditation that continues through forests, oceans, and us. The network expands, folds back, and expands again. And in its endless rhythm, the planet keeps breathing, unhurried, unafraid. Somewhere beneath the surface, the mycelium stirs. It reaches out, softly, as it always has. It does not seek light, only contact. It grows toward what it touches. It listens. It waits.